Hello, it's Jim Hutchins for the Jerusalem Connection Truth Report for this week. Well, the election in Israel is coming up on the 17th. And the outcome is as uncertain today as it has been for months. There is no coalitions that anyone can see that can actually get a majority and be elected. As Netanyahu is no exception to that. So it's really up for grabs, humanly speaking. But that's not true spiritually speaking, as we'll look at in just a minute. But there are many people who have thought about this and who have this as a consideration when they go to the polls on election day here in Israel. There's a great deal of discussion. There's an article in the Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom, and they're saying the decision to hold this election was disgraceful, should have been avoided. Indeed, one of the big questions that could be critical for the outcome of the voters who are fed up with our dysfunctional politics and will simply not bother casting their ballots. Yet, ironically, there's a possibility that the outcome could achieve stability and a new government to be formed may even reflect a national consensus. There are several points that those who are having this discussion made. Setting aside the right and left extremes in both parties, there is a consensus that, number one, both major parties have identical and security objectives. Number two, both agree that an independent Palestinian state at this time would mean creating a terrorist state on our borders that Iran could employ as a launching pad to destroy us. Number three, there are various streams in both parties regarding applying Israeli law to settlements, and if the U.S. does not resist, possibly annexing and applying sovereignty Area C, there will come to a turning point after the elections when the Trump peace plan is finally revealed. Number four, both parties oppose dividing Jerusalem or ceding further territories unless a final settlement is reached. Number five, both agree that in the context of a status quo, all efforts should be made to improve the living conditions of Palestinians, in the hope that they will ultimately have leaders willing to peacefully coexist. Well, that's what there seems to be a consensus of agreement on. We'll see how that's reflected in the actual election. Finally, this article concludes, although this election is somewhat like a lottery, voters should try to set aside their personal feelings, and even if it means holding their noses, support the party whose leader they feel will be best equipped to head our nation over the crucial year facing us. Our choice could have existential repercussions on the nation. So that's the uncertainty with which Israel comes into this election on the 17th. But there's a biblical perspective to an election. And I think it's important that believers recognize that and respond accordingly. For example, Daniel chapter 4, verse 17 says, "The Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men, and he gives up to anyone that he wishes, and he places over them the lowliest of men." Now, why is it that so many of the kingdoms of this world are governed by lowly men? And the only answer I can give for that is so inhabitants will trust in God and not their leaders. I have a bumper sticker at home that I refer to often. It says, "Government is not God." And that's true. And that's especially true in this upcoming election in the United States. You hear the Democrats talk, government is God, but that in fact is not the case. Nor is it the case with Israel in its election on the 17th. There's an additional passage in Romans 13, I think, that gives some clarity to this. Romans 13, verse 1 and following, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority, I say, no authority, except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. We need to recognize this. God institutes the governments and the heads of government. And those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves. So that's a statement of fact. God puts in these heads of state. The Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men. He gives them to anyone that He wants. But there is a role for believers to play, and it's a very, very significant role. It's referred to in Paul's letter to Timothy, 1 Timothy 2, 1 and 2, where he says this, I urge, sense of urgency, I urge first of all, sense of priority, I urge first of all that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings, and for those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. That's what we're to pray for. That God would give us leaders who would allow us to live peacefully and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. We have a great role to play. Intercessors do. That's very significant in any election. And I pray that we may intercede on behalf of not only Israel's election coming up on the 17th, but upon the election in the United States. It's coming up in 2020. The Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men, and He places over them those that He wants. And that's the truth.